welcome to the Future Fabrics Expo 2013 edition. My name is Yasmin Jones-Henry, and I'm a Financial Times writer and the curator of the Lab E20. Today's panel, it's a bit of a mouthful, so bear with me. It's Circularity in Finishing Techniques, Shifting the Industry Away from Plastics and for Longevity and Performance. So, having done the introduction for myself, if we could go round to the panelists, if you give your names, what you do, what your kind of discipline is, starting this way.
Hi, I'm Andy Bass. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Ecovative. And at Ecovative, we grow mycelium, which is the root structure of mushrooms, to be able to address two big challenges on planet Earth: plastics pollution and the hyperproduction of livestock. And so we're able to turn mycelium into materials for the fashion industry, where we focus on footwear, accessories, and other apparel.
Thank you. Patrick?
Hi, I'm Patrick McDowell. I'm a sustainable fashion designer based here in London, and I run my namesake label, Patrick McDowell.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Matthias Foessel, the CEO and co-founder of Beyond Surface Technologies. We are a chemical supplier, and we started 14 years ago to eliminate petroleum in those textile chemical finishes, and we do specialize on creating finishes that create surface effects.
Hi, I'm Aisha, and I'm a footwear designer, but I do a little bit more than that. I'm totally passionate with organic materials. For that, I created an online library with organic materials, and I consult brands with how to design and get organic materials in their ranges.
Thank you. Now, just to set the scene, and I do see a few familiar faces from yesterday, so apologies for the repetition, but in case you didn't see it, this weekend's cover story in the Financial Times was about endocrine disrupting chemicals. And it's really relevant to this panel because a lot of what they were talking about in context to the health crisis that's coming from this relates to how our products are being finished, whether it's the materials that we use to package our food, whether it's what we're putting on our garments or on our shoes or in our interiors. So I'm really glad that we've got a biologist, a chemist, two designers who are making design decisions in the room. And just to kick off, really, I mean, I think that there are multiple factors that you're all engaging with at different levels. So I think if we start with you, Matthias, the chemist, if you could explain what Beyond Surface Technology does in context to how you work with businesses and the supply chain.
Yeah, maybe I should start that from a consumer perspective.
Yes.
Probably not, or almost none of the consumers know how much chemical is being put on the fabric to create effects. They would probably expect the fiber or fabric to do the performance they experience, to absorb sweat, to repel rain, to feel soft. And actually all of that mostly is created by chemical finishes, and all those chemical finishes are pretty much based on petroleum. And so our company 14 years ago started based on a complete failure of mine to convince the bigger chemical corporation to look into other materials than petroleum, but still very much believing into that. So we started 14 years ago to look for natural alternatives to petroleum that would be as well performing as the petroleum-based chemicals do. And in order to enter the market, we actually realized pretty quickly we couldn't approach our eventual direct customer, the textile mill, because frankly, they were busy running their daily production. And they were like, what do you want to talk about? Green chemistry? Well, not sure. So our model works like we actually see the brands. We educate maybe the brands on better alternatives, newer alternatives. And if they like what they hear, they connect us with their existing supply chain, and we then do work with that existing supply chain to implement our technologies.
Thank you. And so my next question is for you, Patrick, as a designer. I know we know each other quite well, actually, but in terms of the industry, I'm really hacking an Ellen MacArthur quote here, but a lot of the sort of waste decisions happen actually in the design room, and you've actually blazed your own trail by kind of setting your stall in context to interrogating, recycling, and upcycling. So could you just share your design process when you're starting to think about the material impact of what you're creating?
Yeah, for sure. So my design journey started when I was a little kid, and I first made a bag out of a pair of jeans because my parents wouldn't buy me a new school bag, and that really started this whole kind of passion around the love of fashion, but also making things out of old things because I kind of had to. I didn't have access to like rolls of material or anything like that. And then going on from that, I kind of took those skills with me to St. Martin's and then to bigger fashion houses where I worked, and then onto my own label. And they've all grown, but we've kind of kept that essence of just trying new things and finding out how we can make something from nothing almost. And it does change the design journey. I suppose when you have limited resources, it challenges you to be more creative, and sometimes it means you go through kind of almost like 2 phases of design, because you have like the thing you've drawn and what you think would be the best option, and sometimes you have to revisit that and change it depending on what you have available. And I actually think it enhances the design at any process, which makes you think more about what it is that you're creating. It makes the piece better. So for me, it's a real asset and a pleasure to work in this way.
Thank you. And my next question is for you, Andy, the biologist in the room. Could you just share a little bit about your journey through Ecovative, but why you started to look at, agricultural waste in context to the feedstock, but also how you ended up with mushrooms?
Yeah, so I like to think of what can biology do that chemistry can't, and probably one of the main things is it can be circular. It can renew itself, and so that was one of the starting points for the core of Ecovative. We had this insight of seeing mycelium grow onto wood chips and really thinking originally like a natural glue. And as we sort of iterated through this process, we're realizing all of the different attributes that mycelium brings to a variety of really huge verticals. So we've done everything from replacing styrofoam in the packaging industry to working in the fashion industry, where we're focused on foams and leather-like materials. We even have you can grow really delicious strains of mycelium and make whole cut plant-based meats as well. But to your point of also using this as a way of upcycling waste, so one of the insights we also had is we can grow mycelium on plant-based agricultural inputs, and we've validated over 700 different types of inputs, so from corn husk to hemp hurd to seed hulls, a variety, so that we can really grow this process anywhere in the world. And so what that does is really unlock that we can grow sustainably next to a production factory, or where the material is going to be actually made into products.
I mean, we were talking about this backstage, but the thing, I'm a bit of a geek, so disclaimer, I'm obsessed with regenerative materials, hence why I'm here. But you're actually solving 2 problems at once, because with the agricultural waste side of it, you're giving that new value, you're basically restoring it. And then on the fashion side of it, you're actually reducing agricultural waste because it's no longer reliant exclusively on cows and all that stuff, which is an interesting thing. I mean, could you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think we also look at ourselves as where can we fit in an existing stack.
Right.
We don't want to reinvent industries. We want to work with designers like Patrick. We want to work with chemists like yourself and Aisha on the footwear side, like really understanding how we can best fit in and how we can play a role with the attributes that we bring. And so we're really looking at mycelium as sort of this blank canvas where we can tune the performance attributes to be able to work in footwear or work as a textile.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you. And Aisha, that was a lovely thread that I can just throw straight to you. Footwear. There are several things I want to tackle, but I'll start with perception and performance, because within fashion, we're almost a bit more loving to the garments that we wear, but the footwear has to work quite hard, just in terms of our daily lives, never mind athletes and the activewear sector. So could you share with us from your own journey as a designer how you take that kind of expectation and manage it with wanting to be innovative at the same time?
What was the last bit? Sorry.
How you manage the expectations people put on footwear with wanting to be innovative in terms of materials you're using at the same time.
Yeah, so I think the work doesn't stop at Ecovative. or at Beyond or at any of the other amazing companies that are displaying here today. I think when they offer their material, it's up to the brands, and ideally, even while they're in their innovation phase as well, to really work together and trial in their labs, but also in our factories. Even before the factories, to really have this innovation space where you trial these materials and put them on unexpected places, think illogical, let's say like dance with the materials, and give it the space and the time it needs to end up on the right spot. It's not because something looks like foam that it's going to be insulation or it's going to be padding. It can be so many other things. Just think about it of being a piece of volume that you can do something with. And I mean, I imagine even for garments, you can create amazing things with volume. So.
Thank you. And you mentioned time and experimentation, which I wanted to bring that back to you, Matthias, because we were talking about this backstage again. I also work across the architectural and built environment sector, and it's fascinating how completely opposite the assumptions and expectations are from investors. So in the built environment, you have an architect that will design a master plan, and the person that's paying for it is fully aware it's going to take 15 years before that thing actually materializes. In fashion, they want the solution yesterday. So could you share with us how you manage that? Because you're basically pioneering something that doesn't yet necessarily exist, but they want it now.
Yeah. Because we do allow us that time, right? Is the short answer. But you're perfectly right. From my previous world, in the chemical corporate world, if I would have to design a new chemical, I probably have 18 months to do that. And I would have to give, I'm sorry, all the figures, all the results up front and hit those milestones. When we move away to work with petroleum, and that's the experience we've built over more than 100 years, now all of a sudden those materials behave rather different. And we have to allow time to understand those different behaviors to then learn and eventually create a new product. So to give you an example, our first product took us 4 to 5 years to develop. And the latest product we are just launching here at the Future Fabric Expo has taken 10 years to develop. Those two products would have never seen any light if I would have to develop them in the corporate world. And that was one of the big reasons to go out and start something ourselves, allow us the time. It's also the reason why we so far, other than with our dear friends Patagonia and Rose Macario at the time, shied away to accept investors, because we wanted to give us the freedom to decide how long do we work on a new material before we give up, if we ever want to give up. And you can only do that if you have the complete control over that decision process. And so we're still fascinated. We screen the world for natural materials. We have looked at way more than 100 different natural oils and waxes, and they all behave different. So we never know what's going to happen tomorrow, and it simply needs time. And we want us to give us that time to come up with some of the solutions we now can provide the industry with.
Thank you. And coming on the topic of time, back to you, Patrick. And I'm actually going to reference the work you did with Pinko, just for context for the audience. There is an element of unpredictability when you're upcycling existing stuff and working with what you've already got. I just want to dig in a little deeper. If you could share what that feels like, how that adventure is for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different to a traditional design process as it's set up now. So classically, we go from like A to B to C to D. And if you're going back in to look at stuff that hasn't sold or old things and asking to redesign that, you're kind of going backwards almost from like retail to production to design at the end. So that in itself is kind of like a bit of a challenge for bigger fashion companies if you're going in and proposing this thing which is different to how they work. We all know people in fashion are stretched. Like often we're doing the jobs of 3 or 4 people as one person, and so when you're like me going in and saying like, let's redesign everything, people are like, really? I have like 100 other things to do. So I think at the moment a big part of it is actually how you can take the team with you and go on the journey together, so when I'm gone they can still do it, which is amazing to see when that happens, when it kind of just becomes part of the overall offering. It can be challenging. It's definitely easier to work with like unsold goods because there's a bit more kind of continuity in the sense that the piece hasn't been worn, or that it's if you have 100 of them, you kind of know they're all going to be of the same kind of quality. We've also done collections with things that people have worn before and they've been sourced back, and that's definitely more challenging. There's more irregularities, and the right I don't like the word consumer, so I'm going to say like experiencer of those clothes is really into it and likes the fact that each of theirs is different. And but for some people they don't like it, and that's more of a challenge. But all of this is a bigger conversation around changing behaviours.
Absolutely,
and often when it's more individual pieces like that, I think it's better to go more high end because you can. You can afford like an atelier and more seamstresses and more hands. I think, but another bigger, wider problem is mass production in general. So we kind of also have to look at how can we move away from the consuming of clothes into the experience of clothes, and how do we almost like mass produce the experience of things rather than the product itself, because that's how you can kind of like maintain a certain equality of revenue without the actual volume of product.
And I have another question for you, because this is what I wanted to get to, is the culture. And I think I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about longevity as well and performance, the fact that you were at the other end of the supply chain after all those design decisions had already been made, did that experience influence your own personal collections when you're thinking about how long is this going to last? What's the end use? Can it be reused at the end of it? Did that have a cross-fertilization impact?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's sustainability is addictive anyway, right? Like you buy a better T-shirt and then suddenly you're changing your like laundry detergent, and you're like buying beans from like containers in like no waste stores. So it's definitely infectious, and I think it's incredible to collaborate, especially as a small brand, with global brands, because I learn so much and they're able to learn a lot from me being quite nimble and smaller, and I'm able to learn enormous amounts from them and their huge teams and the wealth of experience that comes with people that know much more about the industry than I do. And of course, it's part of how I think now about designing. It's like, where will this end up? Are we offering the right services to enable people to come back to us with those pieces? Can we redesign it? Can we fix it? Can we take it back and do something else with it? Yeah, and again, just thinking about that experience. And I think for me, it's always been a privilege and a fascination to build a fashion brand of the future where you can redesign not just the clothes, but also the systems those clothes are sitting in. And I think that's, for me, always felt like the next step of fashion. You know, like we speak about people like Galliano and McQueen from like the 80s and the 90s being like pioneers of design, and they really were. And I think the pioneers of today are the people that are setting up these new amazing fashion companies, of which many are in London, which is incredible, that kind of rethink how we experience clothes. I think that's kind of the next generation of fashion, if you like.
Perfect, thank you. And so on that note, because you mentioned collaboration, Aisha and Andy, I wanted to talk to you about the collaboration between the materialist and the designer. The collaboration between the materialist and the designer in context of refining the product and testing the product. For context, I did a 16-page feature for Craft Magazine last year on footwear and leather and expectations and materiality, and one of the biggest challenges, which I know you'll know about, is the realization amongst some designers that some of the food-based alternatives to plastic actually had the PU coating on it. So they thought, oh, I'm being really sustainable, but actually it won't biodegrade. So I wanted to talk to you both, but I'll start with Aisha and then you, how you've been able to kind of make sure that the product you're giving to the designer can actually help them create a product that can perform both for their own ethical morality, but also for the consumer, making sure it will be durable in its own regenerative way. Hope that makes sense.
So are we talking about our
How
collaboration?
you work with Ecovative.
Yeah, so it's really just being a team together. That's really how I think it should go. So it's not like you and then us and then, no, it's really just, okay, let's be a team together, and then you're good at this, we're good at this, others, and then we just ping pong back and forth. But also, like you said about the expectations of designers, of course, like you said, the people are so much in their business as usual. They're just, and also a lot of designers are so used to just have like a material book. Let's take this and this and this, hub, done, and they're used to certain textures and certain things. So a big part of my job at the moment is also like getting people used to all these new textures, these new behaviors, these new use cases. For the materials. So one simple thing to do, for example, is to have something like here, like a nice sample wall of all these different new materials or old forgotten materials, so people get used to it because they pass by it every day going to the office.
That's really interesting because it picks up on what you're saying about behavioral changes. It's
Yeah.
not just at the consumer end of it, it's at the design end.
Yes, the designers, developers, all people in the business, because then it goes maybe to marketing and maybe they're a bit like, ooh, that's weird. But then, yeah, for example, what we're trialing now is to tell the story of the material through the shoe in this case, to really give that material the space and the visibility it needs. And then maybe people get emotionally connected, both the designers and the marketeers and the shops and the end consumers.
Thank you. And Andy?
Yeah, so I think the collaboration is really important, and we sort of look to the designers to give us performance specs. What do you need the material to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And then we can look at the biology. So we have a library of mushroom strains, and we know, okay, that one is really tough and tenacious. That one's really delicious. So maybe we go with this strain that's hardy. And then we can do high throughput screening to be able to say, okay, under these environmental conditions, which one of these potential mushrooms are going to give us the best performance specs relative to what you need? And once we have those hits, we can then start to scale them up. Aisha can prototype with them and say, okay, yeah, that's close. I think the other thing we have to realize is, like, with mycelium, it's a completely new material. So it's not going to have the exact performance of things that already exist in the world.
Like leather.
Like leather, but it also brings like new performance attributes. And so when it's used, actually, one example is as an insulation, it's breathable like a non-woven, but it's insulating like a closed cell foam. And so you have this unique thing that biology can bring into the equation. I think your other question too about end of life of the material. And so I think for us, we're making a canvas that's compostable in its raw form. We then pass that off to a brand or a tannery, and then you have your own needs. What is the material going to become? Is it a bag that needs to last 100 years, or is it a phone case that only needs to be around for 2? And so I think you can then start making decisions on how it needs to be finished, and you can apply the proper chemistry at that point.
Thank you. Perfect. It's a perfect synergy with an ecosystem
Yeah.
stage. Now, I'm just keeping mindful of time, and I know that people do have questions. So I'm going to put the questions out to the floor. Charles, I see you straight in there. So if we could get the mic over to this gentleman there with his hand up. Thank you.
Matthias, I'm going to ignore you. It's Patrick. Patrick, you have done some phenomenal work which gauges the traditional, something like tweed, but with the modern synthesis of it. Where do you see the future between marrying the old and taking on the modern technology?
That's a big one.
So sorry to pick on you, Patrick.
That's a big question.
By what you say.
No pressure.
It's a great question because there are some incredible materials in the world that have been around for a very long time, and I mean, I personally don't see the problem with them. Actually, most of the issues that we have in fashion are very recent anyway, and many of the things that happened 100 years ago were kind of all right, if not the way to go. That being said, we live in a very, very different world now, and I think that it's really the combination of those like traditional materials, natural materials mixed with technology that can create an incredible future, which is why mycelium can be incredibly interesting, because, you know, like, it's almost like the foundation of life. So it's fascinating, and not unsurprising that it's now also going to fix fashion as well. Because, you know, like, wool is incredible. It's an incredible material on its own. I understand there's certain like moral challenges in certain cases, which can be fixed. Same with silk, same with cotton. You know, they all have their issues, but it's almost like a North Star for me to try and get to a place where we can have everything returned to Earth. And I think it's really needed in the world generally, even outside of fashion, that things can go back into a cycle that was created over billions of years, where things come from the earth and go back into the earth. And so that's something I try and always work towards. So yeah, that's kind of like a long-winded answer, but
Perfect. All right, who's next? Oh, yeah, Celia over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just interested to know, obviously, it seems to me with the panel that we've got here as the discussion, the missing link, I guess, really would be the manufacturers. Is there much work going on at the moment in terms of probably your end of the scale, Andy, and the finishing as well, actually kind of growing fully formed garments or products to cut out that kind of, you know, the kind of the textile mill and the cut and sew sort of places? Is there a lot of sort of development going on in those areas?
I would say from our side with mycelium, we're not quite there at like growing specific shapes, for instance, at the moment, to be able to eliminate off-cut waste when you're cutting a piece of material. But it's certainly possible in the future once we get, you know, on a larger scale of we know what product we're making, we know the exact dimensions. Mycelium can grow into basically any shape that you sort of put the feedstock in, and so I think that's one potential in the future that we can do, where we're growing bespoke for the product to be able to eliminate some of the waste on the manufacturing side. But right now we're growing in really long sheets, and then those sheets can be kind of cut down into material, into the dimensions that the material needs.
Okay. I think any other? Yeah, which one's in the blue shirt? If we could get the mic to him. Perfect. Thank you.
I was just wondering on things like natural vegetable dyes. Are there methods of making them more resistant to things like UV radiation and washing in terms of sort of longevity and how long they say color fast for?
We are not into dyes at all. So we're all on the colorless side, on the effect side. But obviously we also watch that space. And with UV curing, you can certainly go that way, but then there's still the topic of the photoinitiator. So what substances do you need to make them more lasting or more durable? So we got to learn a lot more, I guess, not to maybe introduce regrettable substitutions. So there's a lot going on in terms of growing these new kind of dyes. But I think there's still a lot more work needed to make them perform the way the consumer expects it. And the ways I know today have all some downsides. So we really need to be careful how we approach that. But in general, it'll be coming, and it's a great way to evolve from the synthetic dyes that we have today.
Andy, do you have anything to share to that with Ecovative?
I'll just add on that we're also, you know, working with a lot of different solutions on creating more sustainable dyes and working with companies that we focus on what we do best as mycelium, and then we try to partner with companies that know that domain better. And so there's definitely a lot of great work coming along in color fastness and uses of dyes where it can really be integrated into these new materials. I think the other thing as well with mycelium is it has its own chemical structure, and so you need the dye to basically target those structures. And so there's a lot of, back to chemistry, that needs to take place before things can be solved 100%.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you.
It was just off the back of those answers. I'm really intrigued when we talk about like culture and how we're changing things. In your own ways, do you feel the power to set the bar, to say, this is what we can achieve, and your expectations, whether that's the consumer or the brand, is too much? Like with colour, when we say like, is there a way to kind of make them last longer or whatever it is it that we need to change our minds about how long something lasts and say it's okay that it doesn't, it's okay that it changes? And how much do you feel you have control to say, actually, this is what's possible, and you need to change your perception and expectation?
I think, it goes in a gradual way, and it also depends which audience you're talking to. For example, now we're doing a project where we upcycle shoes that we took back. And then some of them are not cleanable anymore because they're white or light gray. So we're re-dyeing them in another color. But of course, because they had a previous life, they're all going to be different. They had stains from all sorts, which you never know, which obviously you can't speak to as well with your projects. And I think it's a matter of framing it very well and setting the expectations. For example, you could say, like metaphorically, say like it's like wine where it ages and it becomes better. And like with everything, not everyone likes that. So if you offer in the beginning, like this is what it is and this is what it will be over time, for example, then people know what they're buying. But don't put it next to synthetic manufactured, super perfect copy paste, because then of course it's not going to be the same. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Can I add to this?
Matthias, let's go around.
From a chemical perspective, I think we will get there, but we have to be patient, right? And that's the thing we need to manage. To put in perspective, we now have chemical finishes. We compete with petroleum on performance. Okay, we go out, we don't even say it's petroleum free in the beginning. We say, you want a durable water repellent, you want a wicking finish, we have something that meets your performance specification. 30 years ago when I started on green chemistry, that statement would have been impossible. You would have been at the very best 50% of the performance you want to be. Today, we are at par, and why aren't we better in a couple of years? I see the same for color. I see exactly the same. And concurrently, and it's something we put a lot of effort in, I think there's now process technologies available, think of digital, where we will also eliminate two more key aspects or key problems of our industry, water and energy. So what we are working up on is, and this is where we actually do go back into dyeing from a very different perspective, but can we dye and finish in a digital way to eliminate water and energy, and all of which is been based on renewable materials? That's our thinking and our path into the future, and I'm 100% convinced we'll get there. We just don't have to be afraid that in the beginning we may start at 50%, right? And don't let you need some endurance, some tenacity, and you need to stay strong. But if we do that, there's no doubt we'll get there, 100%.
Patrick, do you have anything to add?
I
in the cultural side of it.
Yeah. Cultural change always takes time. And inevitably, it always starts with outsiders, and then it becomes kind of edgy, and then it becomes normal, and then it just becomes like, I don't know, every day just built into everyone's life, right? So it's been really fascinating, even in the short amount of time that I've been running my own brand, the change that's happened around sustainability in general, and the material innovation that's happened. This exhibition like enormous growth in size. I think we both.
Yeah.
I think we started at similar
You
times. So it's
did.
been incredible to see this turn into this.
Yeah.
From a one-room exhibition at one point.
Yeah.
So everything is coming, and it's almost coming faster than I thought it would, which I think is amazing. And yeah, I think your point around different expectations as well, changing what people think something is an important part of the conversation, because, like you said as well about mycelium, it's not polyester, so it's not going to be exactly the same, but it might have even better other attributes. And for me, it's always worked when you can speak to the emotional connection of clothing and how it makes people feel, and kind of like having a relationship with your clothes. And if you can build that into the products that you sell through the storytelling around the pieces, which actually is drastically enhanced if you're making something from someone else's old things. Yeah, it can be really incredible. So.
Brilliant. And thank you. Andy?
Yeah, and I would just add to what's already been said in that think of it like stepping stones. Like we're progressing at every step of the way. It might not be 100% perfect, but we're making progress. And Matthias has a great example of like you take a material and then with his chemistry, it's 95% bio-based. But a lot of times people get hung up on, well, why isn't it 100%? What's wrong with that 5%? It's like, don't dwell on that so much. Like focus on the progress that we've made and know that there's continual effort into continuing that process to really get to an ideal.
Thank you. And just to answer your question from a journalistic point of view, there is a lady that's here that can perfectly give you an answer. Her name is Bella Gronchewitz. She's got a book called Grow, Cook, Wear, Dye. She's an artist in residence at the Lab E20, and she is a fashion designer that dyes her garments both for herself and for her clients using food waste. So onions, nettles, rhubarb. And what she explains to her clients is, when you machine wash something, yes, the color will go, but part of the fun is getting the pot out and doing it again. So I think if you want to talk about the cultural change of how you manage expectations of why natural fibers will behave differently, she's actually doing a book signing, I think, at 2:00-ish. She'll be here. She's the perfect person to talk to you about that, because that's a journey that she's on, both as a designer, but also when she does her workshops with brands, is explaining to them this is a different vibe. So just to say, I think she'll be over there somewhere later on, so look out for her. Right, we've got time for one more question. Thank you.
Hello. I work with a lot of PPE and workwear fabrics, most of which are the most unsustainable ever created. Do you think there's any scope for any of these biologies or chemistries to transfer over into that industry as well? Maybe that have, we're working with flame retardancies or waterproofing or things like that.
Which industry? Sorry.
So PPE, if you think of like the healthcare covering.
Yeah. Well, I can start really quickly in that talking about bringing new functionality into that space. Mycelium is also a great antimicrobial. So when you think of like bandaging wounds and things like that, I think there's definitely opportunity to develop there.
Thank you. And Matthias?
Not really an expert on selectively, yes. Like here, on some we can bring it together. As again, it's like that stepwise approach. On some, I know because of that specific expectations in terms of performance, it comes down to then also the specifics of the construction, etc., etc. On some, I'm very positive even today, but like flame retardants, bio-based, difficult subject. I don't have an answer for that today, but maybe someone else does. And I'm also a firm believer that you need all these different experts, right? We can give you some answers, and then you need other experts to provide the remaining answers. There's not one person here that will be able to solve all this by him or herself. But yes, some answers we will have. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, and I'm really sorry, that's all we have time for, but I think we'll all be around a little bit after, so do stick around if you've got questions. We'll try and take that offline. Thank you so much to our panellists. And I'll see you later.